Have you ever found yourself genuinely unable to look away from a woman who has said nothing, done nothing to draw attention, and yet commands the entire room simply by being present within it? It is not her physical appearance. It is not her social status or the carefully curated image she has constructed for the world. What she possesses is something far more fundamental and far more difficult to manufacture. A profound and unshakable inner strength. True confidence. Not the rehearsed and performed version of confidence that so many people mistake for the real thing. The kind that depends on the right outfit, the right circumstances, or the right audience. But the kind that arises from something altogether different. From an awakened interior self. From a genuine harmony of mind, body, and soul that cannot be faked and cannot be taken away. Carl Jung called this the journey back to the authentic and primal self. The self that exists beneath the accumulated layers of societal expectation, inherited wound, and carefully constructed persona. A truly confident woman does not merely know who she is, she believes it with a certainty that requires no external confirmation. That belief is not gifted to her from the outside. It is the hard-won result of her inward journey, the journey in which she has looked honestly at herself, seen both her light and her shadow in their full and unfiltered reality, and chosen to embrace what she found there without flinching and without apology. So what actually creates this extraordinary quality of presence? And how do we disentangle ourselves from the performance, from the facade constructed out of external expectations and standards that were never truly ours to begin with? What follows is an exploration of how Jung illuminates this phenomenon, and how to begin the process of awakening the most authentic and powerful version of yourself. The question at the center of all of it is deceptively simple. Are you genuinely ready to face yourself? The first essential element is self-trust, and the question worth sitting with honestly is this. Do you actually trust yourself? Not when you are dressed beautifully and moving through the world with the comfortable confidence of being seen and admired, but in those quiet and unwitnessed moments when no one is watching, when no one requires you to perform a version of yourself designed to meet their expectations. When it is just you, alone with your own interior truth. The honest answer for most people is no. Even those who appear decisive and composed on the surface, even those who inspire others with their apparent certainty, often find, when the roles fall away and the silence arrives, that doubt moves in with remarkable ease. Doubt about their emotions, doubt about their choices, doubt about whether the voice they hear from within is trustworthy at all. Jung observed that modern humanity no longer faces primarily a crisis of religion or of morality. It faces a crisis of identity, a profound and widespread disconnection from the true self, from what he called simply the self. And when that connection is severed, the very first casualty is the deep interior trust that allows a person to rely on their own instincts, to honor their own intuition, to recognize the voice within as a genuine guide rather than a source of unreliable noise.
Consider the image of a lighthouse standing in a foggy and turbulent sea. If the light that guides ships to safety originates from an internal and self-sustaining source, that lighthouse can endure any storm without losing its function. But if that light is controlled from the outside, if it depends entirely on external conditions remaining favorable, then the moment the waves rise, the light falters and the way is lost. This is precisely the condition of someone living without genuine self-trust. Their sense of direction depends on recognition, on approval, on the reassurance
offered by someone else saying you are on the right path. The fear of failure, the terror of judgment, the persistent anxiety that something will go irreparably wrong, all of these trace their roots back to this single source. Not to weakness, but to a long-standing habit of placing the power to define yourself into other people's hands. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Carl Jung. Your greatest and most beautiful journey is the one that leads you back to yourself. Subscribe to Carl Jung Philosophy and hit the like button, and let's walk that path together. This pattern does not announce itself dramatically. It repeats itself quietly, daily, in ways that feel entirely ordinary. You hesitate over simple decisions because the fear of being wrong feels disproportionately large. You seek input from multiple people on questions that your own instincts have already answered, and you emerge from those consultations more confused and more anxious than you were before. You stay silent when something feels genuinely wrong because you are not certain your feelings are significant enough to be voiced. You make agreements with yourself to sleep earlier, to move your body, to protect your time and your attention, and then you quietly break those agreements in the small hours of the night, choosing distraction over the self-care you promised. And each time you break one of those small agreements, something registers in the unconscious that compounds over time into a deeply held and rarely examined belief. The belief that your inner voice does not deserve to be honored. That what you feel and know from within is not important enough to act on. Jung named this condition living from the social mask, the persona constructed to satisfy what we believe others require of us. When genuine trust in yourself is eroded consistently enough, you begin to organize your life around an image you think the world wants to see. And in doing so, the original and authentic self, wild, sacred, and irreducibly real, is gradually pushed down into the depths of the unconscious, where it waits with remarkable patience for the moment you are finally willing to reclaim it. Genuine self-trust is not the hollow and performative confidence of modern culture, the loud declarations of self-worth that depend, paradoxically, on an audience to witness them. It is an interior state, a quality of groundedness that allows you to remain standing in the middle of the storm, not because the storm is not real, but because you know with unshakable certainty who you are within it. Like an ancient tree that does not need to grow taller in order to prove its worth. It simply needs roots deep enough to hold it. A woman with genuine self-trust does not need to work at impressing the room. Her presence commands respect not through volume, but through the particular weight that her silence carries. The question worth examining honestly at this stage is how many times you have known with complete clarity what you should do, and then acted directly against that knowing. How many times has your body communicated with unmistakable precision through anxiety, through tension, through a bone-deep exhaustion that had nothing to do with physical tiredness? And you overrode every signal because stopping would mean disappointing someone, inconveniencing someone, failing to meet an expectation that was never genuinely yours to carry. When you betray your own emotional experience consistently enough, something quietly and profoundly damaging occurs. The connection between your mind and your body begins to erode. Intuition blurs until you can no longer distinguish its voice from the noise. Decisions become mechanical rather than felt. You become, in a very real sense, a system executing external requirements, no longer capable of genuinely feeling yourself within your own life. This is precisely why self-trust cannot be transmitted through instruction or absorbed through theory. It must be lived into. It must be grown through direct and repeated experience. To become someone with genuine self-trust, you must relearn one thing that years of living for external approval have caused you to forget. Listening. Not the kind of listening directed toward formulating a response or avoiding a consequence, but the patient and honest kind. The kind that is willing to sit with the quiet whispers of a soul that has been ignored for long enough that it has nearly stopped trying to be heard. Self-trust is the courage to believe that your interior fears and longings and uncertainties deserve to be acknowledged. It is the practice of honoring your intuition, even when it defies the logic that the people around you are applying to your situation. It is the gradual and irreversible shift from asking, "What do they think?" to asking, "What do I actually and honestly feel?" In Jungian psychology, those who are living without genuine self-trust become particularly vulnerable to what Jung called shadow archetypes, the unconscious patterns and projections that drive behavior from beneath the surface of awareness. They are susceptible to manipulation, to persistent self-doubt, to that grinding and relentless sense of never quite being enough, regardless of what they achieve or how much approval they collect. But when self-trust is genuinely present, something fundamental shifts. You reclaim authority over your own psychological system. You stop reacting from the unconscious and begin responding from a place of conscious and sovereign awareness. And here is a truth that deserves to be stated clearly. Self-trust makes a woman genuinely magnetic. Not in a calculated or strategic sense, but in the way that authentic presence always draws people toward it, because it offers them something rare in a world organized around performance. The second essential dimension involves understanding the distinction between two forms of feminine energy that coexist within every woman, and learning to recognize which one is currently governing your experience. Two energies live within every woman simultaneously. One nurtures and radiates outward from a place of genuine interior wholeness. The other operates from a place of unhealed wounding, bleeding in silence beneath whatever surface composure has been carefully arranged on top of it. One moves you steadily toward your most authentic self. The other keeps you anchored in a defensive and reactive posture, maintaining a mask that offers the appearance of strength while concealing a much more frightened and uncertain interior reality. Jung did not name these forces feminine energy directly, but his extensive work on the anima, the shadow, and the process of individuation draws a precise and illuminating distinction between a woman who has genuinely reconciled with her inner world and a woman who is still being directed, largely without her awareness, by her unprocessed wounds. A woman operating from her most grounded and integrated state is not always soft or compliant or without conflict. On the contrary, what she possesses is a specific and quiet authority, a quality of presence that makes the people around her feel genuinely safe without her doing anything deliberate to create that effect. She does not compete for attention because she already belongs, completely and without reservation, to herself. She moves with the natural ease of someone who has made peace with her own worth and no longer requires the external world to confirm it. She can say no without her voice trembling. She can experience grief without shame. She can love with genuine depth without losing herself in the process of loving. She has passed through the interior landscape of her own shadow, walked through the places she was most afraid to look, and returned not carrying resentment or performance, but something far more valuable: understanding. In contrast, a woman still governed primarily by unhealed wound energy lives in a state of perpetual reaction and defense. She may appear exceptionally polished, sharp, and composed on the surface, but within that composed exterior, something younger and more frightened is operating. A part of her that carries a deep fear of abandonment, of betrayal, of ultimately not being chosen by the people and circumstances that matter most to her. She requires external validation to maintain her sense of worth. She is destabilized by relatively small rejections. The silence of an unanswered message carries a weight that is entirely disproportionate to its actual significance, because it activates something ancient within her that has nothing to do with the present moment. Jung called these formations psychological complexes, interior structures built from the accumulated weight of childhood experience, relational wounding, and repeated emotional patterns that were never fully processed and integrated. These complexes do not simply dissolve with time or willpower. They persist beneath the surface, expressing themselves through behaviors and choices and reactions that appear entirely spontaneous, but are in reality the consistent and predictable expression of wounds that are demanding, as wounds always eventually do, to be seen and genuinely healed. Consider two women entering the same room at the same moment. One moves through the space like a quiet current of air, not performing, not scanning for reactions, not arranging herself for observation. yet she is impossible to overlook. Her eyes carry stillness. Her posture communicates a simple and undefended presence. The other is equally striking in her appearance, but something in her energy is slightly contracted. Her gaze moving to gauge who is watching, her laughter pitched slightly louder than the moment requires, as though volume might substitute for the presence she has not yet located within herself. You may not be able to name the distinction immediately, but you feel it. One is genuinely present within her own experience. The other is performing within it. In Jungian terms, the first woman has begun the individuation process, the gradual and often painful work of reuniting the ego with the deeper self, of bringing what was unconscious into the light of conscious awareness. She is no longer simply a victim of her own interior archetypes. She lives alongside them with increasing awareness and intentionality. The second woman is still being directed, largely without her awareness, by the unintegrated patterns of her own shadow, perhaps projecting outward onto others the very qualities she cannot yet accept within herself, or seeking in her intimate relationships the psychological rescue that no other person is actually equipped to provide. The third essential dimension is understanding what Jung actually meant when he spoke about genuine confidence, and why the version of confidence that most of the world is selling bears almost no resemblance to the real thing. In Jung's framework, confidence is not the result of repeating carefully constructed affirmations until they begin to feel true. It is not produced by perfecting your posture or calibrating your smile for maximum effect. It is not a technique to be learned or a performance to be refined. It is the inevitable and natural outcome of a soul that has genuinely found its center. It is not constructed from the outside. It is awakened from within. And it cannot fully exist. This is the part that most approaches to confidence building entirely miss. If the ego has not yet found the courage to confront its own shadow. If the process of individuation has not genuinely begun. If the unconscious is still running the show from behind the curtain of your daily experience. Consider the image of a tree of remarkable size and age. What is visible from the outside, the trunk, the canopy, the evidence of decades of growth and endurance, is only the surface expression of something far more significant happening beneath it. The true source of that tree's vitality, its capacity to withstand storms that would destroy lesser structures, lives entirely in its root system. A genuinely confident woman is built on the same principle. The depth of her roots, her willingness to know herself honestly, to accept both the light and the shadow of her interior landscape, to stop fearing what she finds when she looks without the usual filters, is what makes her unshakable. Not her visible composure, not her apparent ease, but the depth of what lies beneath it. In Jungian psychology, authentic confidence only emerges when the ego stops straining to project a flawless and invulnerable image to the world. An immature ego is perpetually engaged in the exhausting work of concealment, hiding its wounds, performing a version of strength it does not actually possess, maintaining the appearance of certainty in all the places it feels most uncertain. And this concealment has a specific and recognizable cost. It makes you brittle. It makes you hypersensitive to the casual observations of others, to a glance that lingers a moment too long, to a comment that carries the faint possibility of criticism. That brittleness is not confidence. It is defensiveness wearing the costume of confidence. And it is so fundamentally fragile that a single, unexpected encounter with genuine honesty can destabilize it entirely. Jung was consistent in his observation that true interior strength only becomes accessible when a person dares to descend into the deeper territories of the soul, into the places where repressed memories live, where unnamed complexes have been quietly organizing behavior for years, where the unacknowledged shadow has been operating without permission or oversight. It is that descent, difficult and often disorienting as it is, that opens the only door that leads to genuine ascent. True confidence does not reside in external brightness or the performance of having everything together. It lives in the capacity to enter the darkness of your own interior experience without losing your sense of who you are within it. Carl Jung once said that you are what you do, not what you say you will do. This seemingly straightforward observation carries an extraordinary weight of psychological truth. Trust in oneself, genuine, durable, lived-in self-trust, does not arrive through intention or declaration. It is constructed through the accumulated evidence of consistent behavior. No ritual, however meaningful, will produce unshakable self-belief on its own. No affirmation, however carefully worded, is powerful enough to override the evidence of your own repeated choices. Interior trust is built in one way, and one way only, through the consistent alignment between what you say you will do and what you actually do when the moment arrives. In psychology, this alignment is understood as interior integrity, the condition in which your mental and emotional system, from your deepest intentions through to your visible behavior, operates without significant internal contradiction. When you commit to an action, even something modest, even something no one else will ever know about, and then you follow through on that commitment, your unconscious registers something important. The opposite is equally true. When you make an agreement with yourself and quietly break it, your unconscious registers that too. And if this pattern repeats consistently enough, it becomes a form of learned unreliability, a deeply held interior belief that your own word cannot be counted on, that the agreements you make with yourself are ultimately negotiable. Think of a child raised by caregivers who regularly make promises and then fail to honor them. Over time, that child stops placing genuine trust in commitments, including, eventually, their own. They lose the felt sense that what someone says they will do actually bears a reliable relationship to what will happen. Adults who have developed this pattern with themselves experience something similar. Their intuition grows quieter. Their motivation becomes harder to access. They lose the energizing sense of self-direction because somewhere beneath awareness, they have stopped trusting that the direction they point themselves in will be honored. Conversely, every time you honor a commitment to yourself, regardless of how modest it is, regardless of whether anyone else will ever know you made it, you are rebuilding something essential. Behavioral research consistently demonstrates that repeated intentional actions create new neural pathways that reinforce a person's felt sense of control and consistency. The brain responds to your follow-through with a specific and recognizable interior reward, a quiet but unmistakable sense of, "I said I would, and I did." That experience, accumulated over time, becomes the most reliable foundation for genuine confidence that exists. Not because someone told you that you were capable, but because you have demonstrated it to yourself through direct and repeated evidence. The practical entry point into this territory is not through grand transformation, but through deliberate smallness. Not through sweeping declarations about who you are going to become, but through the quiet and consistent honoring of modest commitments that no one else needs to witness or validate. Choose 3 specific and genuinely achievable promises to yourself for the coming week. Write them down somewhere you will encounter them. When you complete each one, pause long enough to actually feel the interior shift. That subtle but real sensation of having done what you said you would. That sensation is not incidental. It is the signal your nervous system and your unconscious are using to rebuild the foundation of self-trust that years of self-betrayal may have eroded. And when you fail, because you will, as everyone does, do not meet that failure with punishment or with the familiar internal narrative of further evidence that you cannot be trusted. Simply return. The foundation of genuine self-trust is not constructed from perfection. It is constructed from persistence, from the repeated choice to come back to yourself rather than to abandon yourself at the first sign of difficulty. Every time you choose to return, you are sending your interior world a message of extraordinary importance. You are worth coming back to. Once you have begun the work of rebuilding self-trust through consistent and honest action, something begins to shift beneath the surface in ways that initially feel subtle, but gradually become unmistakable. You start to notice what depletes you, what has always depleted you, with a clarity that was previously unavailable because you were too busy overriding your own signals to receive them. Not because the world around you has suddenly become more demanding or more toxic, but because you have stopped numbing yourself to what you were already feeling. You have stopped pretending that the discomfort was not real, that the internal signals were not worth heeding, that the cost of continuing to ignore yourself was somehow sustainable. And at precisely that moment of awakened sensitivity, something becomes essential that was previously optional. Boundaries. Jung did not frame the establishment of personal boundaries as a social skill to be acquired or a communication technique to be practiced. He understood it as something far more fundamental, a spiritual act. In his framework, every interaction you have with the external world is a direct reflection of the relationship you maintain with your own interior life. When you consistently permit other people to diminish you, to invade the spaces you have not yet learned to protect, to deposit their chaos into a psychological environment you have not yet claimed as your own, that is not simply a matter of being too accommodating or too kind. It is a clear and consistent signal that your sense of interior worth is not yet stable enough to hold its ground. And when boundaries erode, self-trust collapses alongside them. The two are inseparable. Because how can you genuinely trust someone who will not protect themselves, even when that someone is you? Imagine yourself as the guardian of a sacred space, a place that holds everything most essential and most irreplaceable about you. Your intuition, your clarity, your sense of direction, your capacity to dream and to build, and to feel yourself moving towards something genuinely aligned with who you are. Now imagine what happens to that space when you allow anyone who arrives at its threshold to enter without consideration, to create disorder, to bring manipulative or draining energy, to help themselves to whatever they find there without contributing anything of genuine value in return. The space does not simply become messier, it becomes unsafe. And when the space within you is not safe, you cannot hear yourself within it. In trauma-informed psychology, the persistent absence of personal boundaries is one of the most reliable indicators of early self-worth wounding. People who grew up in environments where their boundaries were regularly violated, where their emotions were dismissed or used against them, where they were required to minimize themselves in order to receive love or safety, carry those patterns into adulthood with a fidelity that is both heartbreaking and entirely understandable. As adults, they yield when they should hold firm. They diminish themselves in order to make others comfortable. They endure what they should not endure, as though endurance were the price of belonging. And they repeat this pattern not because they lack intelligence or self-awareness, but because it is the only relational template their early experience provided. The practical work of establishing boundaries does not begin with dramatic confrontations or sweeping declarations of changed behavior. It begins with the small and specific act of noticing. Identify 3 recent situations in which you left the interaction feeling genuinely drained, uncomfortable, or somehow diminished. Write them down with as much specificity as you can access. Who was present? Where did it occur? What did you feel in your body during and after? What did you do, or more importantly, what did you stop yourself from doing in response? This exercise is not about assigning blame or constructing grievances. It is about developing the honest and detailed awareness of where your energy is currently leaking out of your life without your conscious permission. From that awareness, begin practicing what might be called micro-boundaries, the smallest possible acts of self-protection available to you in your current circumstances. Declining a call when you are genuinely exhausted rather than pushing through out of obligation. Allowing a message to remain unanswered until you have the actual interior resources to respond with honesty rather than performance. Removing yourself from a digital environment that consistently leaves you feeling worse than before you entered it. These actions will feel uncomfortable initially, particularly if you have spent years organizing your behavior around the avoidance of other people's disappointment. That discomfort is not a signal that you are doing something wrong. It is a signal that you are doing something new. And new in the early stages almost always feels like wrong. Jung wrote with characteristic directness that there is no coming to consciousness without pain. Boundaries sometimes cause genuine discomfort for the people around you who have benefited from their absence, and for the part of you that has been conditioned to interpret your own needs as an imposition. But that discomfort is not something to be avoided. It is something to be moved through. Because on the other side of it is something that cannot be reached any other way. A quality of interior safety and self-respect that makes genuine presence possible. That allows you to stop bracing and start actually living. As all of these elements gradually accumulate and integrate, the self-trust built through consistent action, the deepening capacity to distinguish between wound energy and authentic presence, the awakening confidence that does not depend on external confirmation, the boundaries that protect the interior ground you have worked to reclaim. Something begins to radiate from you that you may not even fully register at first. A quality of presence that other people feel before they can name it. Jung captured this phenomenon with precision when he observed that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If any reaction occurs at all, both are transformed. A woman who has done this work, who has walked honestly through her own interior landscape and returned from it carrying something real, becomes a particular kind of presence in any space she enters. Not because she is performing groundedness, but because she has stopped performing entirely. She has nothing left to prove, and therefore nothing to defend. And that combination, genuine presence meeting genuine self-acceptance, produces something that the people around her feel as safety, as permission, as quiet and wordless encouragement to stop performing themselves. She does not arrive in a room attempting to command it, yet something in her stillness draws people toward it. She does not speak about her journey loudly or with the need for recognition, yet something in the way she inhabits herself makes others wonder what it would feel like to inhabit themselves with the same quality of honest and undefended ease. This is what Jung meant when he spoke of the individuation process as something that does not merely change the individual who undergoes it. It sends ripples outward into every relationship and environment that person inhabits. You do not just change your own life when you do this work. You quietly alter the possibility of what the people nearest to you believe is available to them. Self-trust, understood in its deepest sense, is not a destination you arrive at and then simply occupy without further attention or renewal. It is a living and ongoing relationship with yourself, with your interior truth, with the parts you that are still in the process of healing, and the parts that have already found their ground. It grows through the moments you choose to stay rather than flee, through the small and unwitnessed decisions to honor what you feel rather than override it for the convenience of others. Through the patient and persistent practice of treating yourself as someone worth returning to, even when, and especially when, no one else is watching. Subscribe to Carl Jung Philosophy